Imagine this. You clock into work for years, right? You build a career, feel secure, and then suddenly find out that the very document defining your job, maybe your contract, well, it means nothing.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah. And what if the seemingly small detail in that contract, or maybe the lack of a detail, triggers a decade-long legal fight, pushing you all the way to the Supreme Court just to prove you were a regular worker, not just, temporary?
It happens more often than you'd think.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really powerful Supreme Court case from the Philippines. It just lays bare the whole fight for job security and highlights how incredibly important every single legal detail can be.
That's right. Our mission today is really to pull back the curtain on this specific case for you. We want to trace its journey, its winding path through the different courts, point out the crucial moments.
The turning points.
Exactly. And ultimately, extract the most impactful insights. See how the law fundamentally protects workers, how it shapes that whole employer-employee relationship. It's quite a journey to see justice unfold at the highest level.
Absolutely. So the case we're dissecting today is Steelweld Construction Joven Stana and Josephine Stana, petitioners, versus Serafin Echano, Renato Salazar, and Roberto Copillo, respondents.
That's the one.
And it's a significant ruling, came from the Supreme Court's First Division, officially docketed as GR number 2009-86, and it was promulgated, which basically means publicly announced, on September 29, 2021.
So relatively recent in terms of final resolution, even though the event started much earlier.
Right, exactly. So to really get into this, let's rewind, go back to the very beginning. What were the initial claims? What did Echano, Salazar, and Copillo actually bring against Steelweld Construction? What kicked off this whole thing?
Okay, so you've got these three workers, Serafin Echano, Renato Salazar, and Roberto Copillo. They filed their complaint way back in February 2010. Echano, he started as a carpenter and bodegero, like a warehouse man, back in 2006.
Okay.
He alleged he got diagnosed with tuberculosis in early 2009. The company apparently made him take 2 sick leaves. Then when he came back with a medical certificate saying he was fit to work.
Ready to go back?
Right. Steelweld just refused to take him back. This was around November 2009. Then there's Salazar, a painter, who'd been with them since 2005. He claimed he was just abruptly terminated in December 2009.
Out of the blue.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It happened shortly after he and some coworkers had apparently raised some grievances with the company.
Ah, interesting timing.
And finally, Copillo, also a painter. He was the longest serving, started way, way back in 2001.
Wow, 8 years by then.
Easily. He said he was just barred from the company premises in December 2009. This was after he'd apparently demanded better working conditions and got this really vague notice to explain. So all three felt, illegally dismissed.
Understandably.
And they were also seeking money claims, underpayment, non-payment of wages, their 13th month pay, other benefits they thought were owed to them.
Okay, so that's one side. Workers claiming unjust termination, withheld benefits, years of service. How did Steelweld Construction respond? What was their defense against these pretty serious allegations?
Well, Steelweld's main defense, their whole strategy, hinged on this key distinction in labor law. They argued Echano, Salazar, and Copillo weren't regular employees at all. They said they were project employees.
Project employees, meaning?
Meaning, from Steelweld's point of view, their jobs were tied to specific construction projects. Once the project finished, poof, employment ends automatically. That was their core argument.
Okay, so how did they explain the specific terminations then?
Well, for Echano, they claimed he'd actually abandoned his work after his sick leave.
Even though he came back with a doctor's note.
That was their claim. For Salazar, they just said his project was nearing completion, kind of implying his job was naturally ending anyway.
Convenient.
And for Copillo, the long-serving painter, they alleged he was terminated for gross and habitual neglect. They pointed to one specific incident where he supposedly used the wrong paint color and mentioned some other unspecified complaints.
Gross and habitual sounds serious, but based on one paint mistake.
Seems thin, right? And they also threw in this other point. They claimed all their payrolls and pay slips were lost during Typhoon Ondoy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which they said made it hard for them to prove they'd actually paid all the compensation and benefits correctly.
Okay, so claims and counterclaims. Where did this first land? Who made the initial ruling?
This first clash went before the Labor Arbiter. That's like the first-level judge for labor disputes here in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And in a decision dated July 22, 2010, well, it didn't go well for the workers.
Oh.
The Labor Arbiter sided completely with Steelweld, dismissed the whole complaint. They found Echano's termination justified because he supposedly failed to report back properly. Salazar's was okay because his project was supposedly ending.
Mm-hmm.
And Copillo, well, they said he was properly terminated for cause, even noting he admitted the paint issue.
Wow. So the arbiter bought the company's arguments entirely.
Pretty much. And crucially, the labor arbiter accepted Steelweld's main line, that they were project employees. And if they're project employees, then they weren't really entitled to the claims they were making about security of tenure and certain benefits in the same way regular employees are.
So round one goes completely to the employer. That must have been devastating for Echano, Salazar, and Copillo. What happens next? Did they appeal?
They did. They appealed to the National Labor Relations Commission, the NLRC. This is the body that reviews the labor arbiter's decisions.
And how did the NLRC see it? Did they just rubber stamp the arbiter's decision, or?
No, not at all. This is where things took a dramatic turn. The NLRC, after looking things over, completely reversed the labor arbiter's decision.
Completely reversed?
Yes. They didn't just disagree on minor points. They fundamentally rejected Steelweld's core argument. Remember how the arbiter accepted they were project employees? Well, the NLRC dug into that. They looked at the employment contracts Steelweld presented, and they found something critical. Those contracts, the ones supposed to prove the temporary project-based nature of the work, they were unsigned by the workers.
Unsigned. So no proof the workers actually agreed to that status.
Exactly. It wasn't just a technical slip-up. It went right to the heart of the matter. Were these workers ever properly informed at the very start that they were being hired only for a specific project? Did they understand and agree to that? The NLRC said Steelweld failed to prove this.
That seems huge. You can't just call someone a project employee.
Precisely. The burden of proof is on the employer to show the worker knew and accepted that temporary status. Because Steelweld couldn't show that, the NLRC made a huge finding. They declared Echano, Salazar, and Copillo were, in fact, regular employees.
Wow. Regular employee. Okay, that changes the entire picture, right? If they're regular, then their dismissals have to be judged very differently.
Absolutely. Regular employees have security of tenure under the law. You can't just let them go because a project is ending or because of one mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So, because the NLRC found they were regular employees, they then looked at the reasons for dismissal again, and they declared all three illegally dismissed.
Okay, walk me through why for each one based on them being regular now.
Sure. For Echano, remember, Steelweld claimed abandonment. The NLRC said no way. He presented a medical certificate saying he was fit, and then he filed an illegal dismissal complaint. Those actions completely contradict any intention to abandon your job.
Makes sense. What about Salazar, the guy whose project was supposedly ending?
Steelweld simply didn't present any real proof that the specific project Salazar was working on was actually nearing completion. You can't just say it. You have to show it. Since he was a regular employee, that wasn't a valid reason anyway without proper process.
Right. And Copillo, the painter with the wrong color paint.
The NLRC looked at that and said, okay, maybe he made a mistake. But was it gross and habitual neglect? No. It seemed like an isolated incident. And Steelweld didn't provide evidence they'd properly documented or warned him about any other alleged issues. You need a pattern, usually, for habitual neglect, and it needs to be serious for gross neglect.
So one mistake isn't enough to fire a regular employee after 8 years?
Generally, no. Not without proper procedure, and if it doesn't meet the high bar of gross and habitual neglect. So the NLRC didn't just say they were illegally dismissed, they ordered Steelweld to reinstate all three workers.
Back to their old jobs?
Yes, plus pay their full back wages from the time they were dismissed and their 13th month pay, a major victory for the workers at this stage.
A huge turnaround from the labor arbiter. But Steelweld didn't just accept this, did they? They took it higher.
They did. They weren't happy with the NLRC's decision, so they elevated the case to the Court of Appeals, the CA. They filed what's called a petition for certiorari.
Okay, and what happened at the CA? Did they dive back into the regular versus project employee debate?
Actually, no. The Court of Appeals dismissed Steelweld's petition outright. Just threw it out.
Whoa, why? Not on the merits.
Nope. It was purely procedural. Steelweld had made a critical error. Before going to the CA with a petition for certiorari under Rule 65, you generally first have to file a motion for reconsideration, or MR, with the body you're questioning, in this case, the NLRC.
You have to ask them to rethink their own decision first.
Exactly. Give them a chance to correct any errors they might have made. Steelweld skipped that step entirely. They went straight from the NLRC decision to the CA petition.
And the CA said, nope, you missed a step.
Pretty much. They considered the failure to file an MR a fatal defect and they dismissed the petition on that basis alone, without even looking at whether the NLRC was right or wrong about the employee's status or dismissal.
Wow. So, a procedural knockout. This case has had some twists and turns already. It seems like it's finally over, but we know it reached the Supreme Court.
It did. Steelweld wasn't done yet. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court, asking them to review the CA's dismissal and ultimately the NLRC's findings.
Okay, so now we're at the highest court in the land. What are the big questions they're looking at? I guess that procedural issue from the CA is front and center.
Absolutely. That's the first hurdle the Supreme Court had to tackle. They essentially faced two main issues. First, the procedural one. Did the Court of Appeals make a mistake in dismissing Steelweld's petition just because they didn't file that motion for reconsideration with the NLRC?
And the second issue.
The second was the core substantive question. Were these workers project employees or regular employees?
Yeah.
And flowing from that, were they illegally dismissed? The stuff the NLRC ruled on.
So how did the Supreme Court handle that procedural mess first? Did they agree with the CA that skipping the MR was fatal?
Well, the Supreme Court started by confirming the general rule. Yes, for a petition for certiorari under Rule 65, you do typically need to file a motion for reconsideration first. The idea is judicial courtesy, giving the lower court or body the chance to fix its own mistakes.
But are there exceptions? The law often has exceptions, right?
Exactly, and the Supreme Court acknowledged that. They reiterated that while the rule's important, it's not absolutely rigid. There are recognized exceptions.
And did one apply here? Did Steelweld get a pass on skipping the MR?
They did. The Supreme Court decided to excuse Steelweld's failure to file the MR in this specific case. They pointed to an established exception. You don't necessarily need an MR when the questions raised in the certiorari proceedings have been duly raised and passed upon by the lower court.
Meaning if the NLRC already thoroughly discussed the issues, asking them again would be pointless.
Precisely. The NLRC had gone into detail about the employment status, the dismissals, everything. Filing the MR would likely have just resulted in the NLRC saying, "We already decided this." The Supreme Court felt applying the strict rule here wouldn't serve justice.
Was there any other reason they decided to overlook it? Steelweld mentioned their lawyer messed up.
They did mention counsel's negligence. The court reiterated the general principle that, usually, a lawyer's mistake binds the client. You can't just keep blaming your lawyer to reopen cases indefinitely. However, the overriding factor here seemed to be preventing further delay.
Delay.
Yeah, think about it. This case started in February 2010. By the time it reached the Supreme Court, it was over a decade later, 11 years. The court explicitly mentioned this and said resolving the case on its merits was necessary to avoid prolonging the workers' wait for justice any further.
Okay, that makes sense. Justice delayed is justice denied, as they say. So, procedural issue cleared. Now, the Supreme Court could finally focus on the main event. Were they project or regular employees?
Correct. With the procedural hurdle out of the way, the Supreme Court dove into the substantive issue. They meticulously reviewed the evidence and the NLRC's findings.
And what was their conclusion? Did they agree with the NLRC?
Yes, they did. The Supreme Court synthesized all the points and definitively ruled that Echano, Salazar, and Copillo were regular employees, not project employees. They affirmed the NLRC's conclusion.
What were the key reasons the Supreme Court gave for this?
Several key things stood out for the court. First, the lack of clear communication in hiring. Steelweld completely failed to show that these employees were properly informed at the time they were hired that their jobs were only for a specific project with a set end date.
Those unsigned contracts again?
Exactly. The court said those unsigned documents had no real probative weight. Second, Steelweld didn't comply with Department Order Number 19. That order requires employers to report the start and, crucially, the termination of project employment to the Department of Labor and Employment, or DOLE.
And Steelweld didn't do that.
Apparently not. The court noted this failure is a strong indicator that the workers weren't considered project employees by the company itself, or at least they didn't follow the rules for them.
What else?
The sheer length and continuity of their service was a major factor. Echano worked for 3 years, Salazar for 4 years, and Copillo for a remarkable 8 years. They weren't just doing short, specific project tasks. They were performing work that was necessary and desirable to Steelweld's main business construction.
So doing the core work of the company for years.
Right. That strongly points towards regular employment under Article 295 of the Labor Code, which defines regular employment. The court found all these factors combined overwhelmingly supported the conclusion that they were regular employees.
Okay, so the Supreme Court confirms regular employees. That leads directly to the next question.
No.
What about their dismissals? Were they legal?
Since they were regular employees, the dismissals had to meet stricter standards. There must be a just or authorized cause, and the employer must follow procedural due process, notice and hearing. The Supreme Court examined each dismissal again in this light.
And did Steelweld meet those standards?
No, they didn't. The Supreme Court affirmed the NLRC's finding of illegal dismissal for all 3 workers.
Let's break it down again. Echano.
Steelweld's claim of abandonment was totally rejected. The court highlighted, like the NLRC did, that Echano came back with a medical certificate and filed an illegal dismissal case. These actions clearly show he didn't intend to abandon his job. Plus, Steelweld failed to send him the proper written notices required for termination.
Okay. Salazar. The project ending.
The court found Steelweld presented 0 concrete evidence that the specific project Salazar was assigned to was actually ending. It was just an assertion, not proof. Not a valid cause for dismissing a regular employee without evidence and due process.
And Copillo, the painter.
His single mistake with the paint color was definitely not gross and habitual neglect. The court stressed that negligence needs to be both gross, serious, and habitual, repeated, to justify firing someone. An isolated incident, especially one like this, doesn't cut it. And again, no proof. Steelweld addressed other alleged complaints with him properly.
So, illegal dismissal confirmed for all 3 by the highest court. After this incredible 11-year legal battle, what was the final outcome? What did the Supreme Court order Steelweld to do?
The final ruling was quite comprehensive. The Supreme Court reversed and set aside the Court of Appeals resolutions that had dismissed the case procedurally. Then, they affirmed with modification the NLRC's resolution, which had found illegal dismissal.
Affirmed with modification. What was modified?
The main modification concerned the remedy. The NLRC had ordered reinstatement. However, the Supreme Court acknowledged that after 11 years, reinstatement might not be practical or healthy. The relationship between the workers and Steelweld was likely, severely strained.
Makes sense. So instead of reinstatement,
the Supreme Court ordered Steelweld to pay separation pay. This was calculated as 1 month's pay for every year of service each employee rendered.
Okay, separation pay instead of their jobs back. What else?
They were also awarded full back wages. This is crucial. It's the salary they should have earned from the date they were illegally dismissed, all the way up until the date the Supreme Court's decision becomes final. That's potentially over a decade of back pay.
Wow, that's significant.
Yes. Plus, they were awarded their 13th month pay for the period from February 16th, 2007, 3 years before they filed the complaint, based on prescription rules, up until their respective termination dates. And finally, the court imposed legal interest of 6% per annum on the total monetary award from the finality of decision until it's fully paid.
So a substantial financial award for the workers. What about the individuals named Joven and Josephine Echano? Were they personally liable?
That's an important point. The court specifically noted that Joven Echano and Josephine Echano were not held solidarily liable with the company. This usually happens only if there's proof they acted in bad faith or with malice. Since no bad faith was clearly established on their part in the dismissal itself, the liability remained with the corporation, Steelweld Construction.
Got it. So the company pays. This whole case, this long journey, it really raises some big questions for us, for you listening. What are the key takeaways? What broader lessons can we pull from this complex legal fight?
Oh, there's so many important doctrines reinforced here. It's like a mini masterclass in Philippine labor law, procedure, and substance.
Give us the highlights. What should people remember?
Okay, first, that motion for reconsideration, MR, as a condition precedent for certiorari, Rule 65, it's generally required. Don't skip it unless you're sure an exception applies.
But there are exceptions to the MR rule, as we saw here. The court can excuse it, especially if the issues were already fully debated or if there's been massive delay.
Right. Also, the reminder that negligence of counsel generally binds the client. You hire a lawyer, you're generally stuck with their actions, good or bad. It stresses why clients need to stay engaged with their own cases, too.
Definitely. What about the core issue, regular versus project?
Huge takeaway there. The case really clarifies the factors for distinguishing project versus regular employees under Article 295 of the Labor Code. It's about clear communication at hiring, the nature and duration of the work, and the employer's duty to comply with DOLE reporting for project hires. Failure on these points weighs heavily towards regularity.
And if someone is a regular employee?
Then the requirements for valid dismissal are strict. You need both a valid reason, just or authorized cause, and fair procedure, due process, notice, and hearing. Steelweld failed on both counts here.
The case also shed light on specific grounds for dismissal, didn't it? Like abandonment.
Yes, it reinforced the elements of abandonment of work. It's not just about being absent. There must be a clear, deliberate intent to quit. Filing an illegal dismissal case pretty much kills any claim of abandonment.
And the painter's mistake.
That clarified gross and habitual neglect. It has to be both gross, serious, significant, and habitual repeated. A single, minor mistake usually won't cut it. And finally, the ruling confirms the twin remedies of illegal dismissal. Reinstatement and full back wages are the standard. But it also shows separation pay is a practical alternative when reinstatement just isn't feasible anymore, usually due to strained relations or a long time passing.
That's a fantastic summary of the key legal points. So for everyone listening, what really stands out to you from this deep dive? Do you have thoughts on this balance, this tension between an employer needing flexibility, maybe with project work, and an employee's right to security? We'd love to hear your comments and favorite insights.
Please do share them.
And hey, if you found this deep dive valuable, if you feel like you learned something important, please hit that subscribe button. We're here to help you get up to speed on complex topics quickly but thoroughly, unpacking them one surprising fact at a time.
And maybe just one final thought to leave you with. This case really reminds us that beyond all the legal definitions and court arguments, the actual strength, the reality of job security, often comes down to how consistently these labor laws are applied on the ground, and frankly, the relentless pursuit of justice when they're not. So maybe ask yourself, what fundamental principles of fairness do you think are the absolute most important for creating a workplace that feels truly equitable and secure for everyone involved?